Abandoned, but still waiting. What she held onto will break your heart, broken heart paw prints. She was left inside a bag, with only a note and a broken heart. But what she was waiting for? That shattered me. Backhand index pointing right like, share and subscribe if you believe no animal deserves this. It was just after sunrise when Jason, a local jogger, laced up his shoes and headed out for his usual morning run. The streets were still quiet, the world painted in soft amber light. As he passed the edge of a small suburban park, something made him slow down. A faint whimper, barely audible, echoed from behind the row of dumpsters near the maintenance shed. At first, he thought he imagined it, but then he heard it again. Curious and concerned, he turned off the path and walked toward the sound. That's when he saw it, a weathered duffel bag, hanging awkwardly from a bent nail on the side of a broken wooden fence. It was swaying gently in the breeze, as if someone had hung it there deliberately. Jason's stomach turned. He stepped closer, heart pounding, and slowly unzipped the bag. Inside was a trembling white puppy, eyes wide with fear, ribs showing through her fur. She was barely breathing, and her tiny body was curled tightly as if trying to disappear. But what broke him more was what he found tied to her collar. A small, crumpled note, scrawled in messy handwriting, "She's still waiting for the one who left." Jason froze, the paper shaking in his hand. What did it mean? Who would do something like this? He knelt beside her, whispering gently, trying to soothe the puppy's shivers. Tears welled in his eyes as she looked at him, not with fear, but with a silent question. Like she was still hoping, still waiting. He scooped her into his arms and called animal rescue, his voice cracking. The operator on the line could hear it in his tone. This wasn't just a rescue. It was the beginning of something much deeper. As Jason waited for help to arrive, the little pup didn't whine or struggle. She just stared at the horizon beyond the trees, the way someone looks toward a door that never opened. And in that moment, Jason understood, this wasn't just abandonment. This was love left behind, and a heart still holding on. The ride to the shelter was quiet, but not because of peace. It was the kind of silence that makes your chest tighten, the kind that feels like holding your breath for someone else. The little puppy, now named Hope by the rescue staff, didn't bark, didn't squirm. She just rested her fragile head against Jason's chest the whole way, her eyes half closed as if she had nothing left to give. When they arrived, the team gently placed her on a warm blanket, but even then, Hope didn't respond. No tail wag. No tiny lick. Nothing. She lay there like a soul waiting for a door to open that never would. The staff did everything they could, offered soft food, squeaky toys, even other friendly puppies, but Hope remained still. Every few minutes, she'd lift her head, not toward the people caring for her, but toward the shelter's entrance, like she was expecting someone to walk in. Someone she'd been promised would return. Days passed. Volunteers came and went. Some cried. One older woman whispered, "It's like she's grieving." Hope barely ate. The only time she moved with any intention was when she heard the front bell chime. Her ears would lift, eyes wide, just for a second. But when it wasn't the one she was waiting for, she'd lay back down, defeated all over again. Staff began to realize this wasn't just trauma, it was heartbreak. A kind of loyalty only dogs seemed to understand. But what pained everyone most was the note. She's still waiting for the one who left. Who left her? And what? A shelter vet named Dr. Marla, soft-spoken and kind, decided to run a microchip scan. To everyone's surprise, Hope had one. As the vet read the details, a flicker of something passed across her face, confusion mixed with dread. The registered owner wasn't who anyone expected. There was no abuse record. No abandonment file. The name on the chip was that of an elderly woman, one who had passed away months ago. The staff exchanged glances. Hope wasn't just left behind. She was left by someone she had loved. And in her tiny heart, some part of her still believed they were coming back. As the mystery deepened, so did the ache in everyone's chest. Hope wasn't just a rescue, she was a living memory, still waiting at the door. Dr. Marla sat quietly in her office, the chip registration form trembling slightly in her hands. The name listed was Evelyn Grace, a retired schoolteacher in her late 70s. She had passed away just 3 months ago, according to public records. A knot formed in her throat as she looked back at Hope, curled up in the corner of her kennel, eyes still fixed on the shelter entrance. Something didn't add up. If Evelyn had died months ago, how did Hope end up stuffed in a bag, barely alive, with a note that spoke of someone abandoning her? Driven by instinct more than protocol, Dr. Marla called the last known address. The line connected to a neighbor named June, who immediately gasped at the mention of Hope. "Oh my God," June said. "That little angel's still alive?" Within hours, June arrived at the shelter, tears already running down her cheeks before she even saw the dog. She knelt beside Hope, whispering her name, but Hope didn't respond. Her eyes just blinked slowly, as if trying to place a familiar voice in a world that had shifted too much. June looked up and told the staff everything. Evelyn had loved Hope like a daughter. After her husband passed, she adopted Hope as a puppy and never spent a day without her. They were inseparable, morning walks, bedtime snuggles, even grocery runs. That dog was her world, June said softly. And Evelyn was hers. But when Evelyn suddenly collapsed in her garden and died from a heart attack, everything spiraled. Her distant relatives, people who hadn't spoken to her in years, showed up days later to claim her house and possessions. They wanted nothing to do with the dog. When June offered to take Hope, they told her she'd already been taken care of. What they didn't say was how. Instead of surrendering Hope to a shelter or rehoming her, they stuffed her into a bag, scribbled a vague note, and left her hanging like trash, all while pretending she had vanished. Hope hadn't just lost her owner. She had been discarded by people who viewed her love as disposable. When June finished the story, the shelter room was silent. The staff stared at Hope, seeing her in a new light, not just as a rescued stray, but as a grieving soul, still anchored to a love so deep it refused to fade, no matter how cruel the world had been. 2 weeks had passed since the truth about Hope's past had come to light, but nothing changed her behavior. Every morning, as the sunlight crept into the shelter through the tall front windows, she would lift her tired little head and look toward the entrance, hope flickering in her eyes for just a second. Then, like clockwork, her gaze would fall, and she would curl back into herself, waiting again. The staff adored her, but couldn't reach her heart. She wasn't waiting for a new toy, a warm bed, or even a kind touch. She was waiting for someone who felt like Evelyn. Someone who carried the same kind of quiet, gentle love. Then, one rainy afternoon, a couple walked in with their 7-year-old daughter, Emily. The little girl was shy, hiding behind her mom's coat. Her parents gently explained that Emily had just lost her own grandmother, and she hadn't spoken much since. They were hoping a companion might help her heal. As the family walked past the kennels, the usual barks and tail wags filled the room, but Hope remained motionless, head tucked into her paws. Until Emily stopped. She stood silently in front of Hope's enclosure, eyes locked with the puppy's. The staff watched in awe as Hope slowly lifted her head, not to check the door this time, but to look directly into Emily's face. The little girl sat down on the floor without a word, legs crossed, fingers curled into her sleeves. She didn't speak. Hope didn't move. But something passed between them. Two hearts, equally broken, recognizing each other's pain. Minutes passed before Emily whispered, barely audible, "You were waiting, weren't you?" Hope stood up. It was the first time she had stood on her own since arriving. The staff couldn't breathe. Emily's parents wiped tears from their eyes as the little girl reached her hand through the bars. Hope pressed her head gently against Emily's palm. No flinching. No fear. Just peace. That day, the shelter completed the paperwork faster than ever before. As Emily and her new best friend walked out the front door, the staff stood still, watching something sacred unfold. Hope didn't look back. She didn't need to anymore. Because what she had been waiting for all along wasn't a person from her past, it was a soul just as lost as hers, finally found.